Satnam, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome everyone to another episode in our continuing program, Home, Kirtan and Chat. And I'm very excited today because our guest has been doing some very interesting work. Some of you may know of Kirit Singh, but Kirit Singh is here, and he's been doing some studies, PhD studies in the area of fairly ancient Kirtan style, and has been studying this style himself, and he's doing his PhD through the School of Oriental and Asian Studies, right, in London. And he studied with Ustad Gurdev Singh and Ustad Harbhajan Singh Namdari, and is currently studying with Pandit Uday Balwalkar and Balwalkar. I knew I was going to mess that name up. Anyway, and he is also the co-founder of the Madonna project, and we're going to talk about that in detail. But I thought we'd start out the program as usual with some kirtan. So, Kirit, if you can share a little, that would be wonderful.
Yes.
And just move your camera down a little bit if you could. Angle your camera down. Thank you. That's great. Well, there we go. Perfect.
So, thank you, Drupad Singh Ji. It's a pleasure to be joining you all today through this live medium. I'm going to share, to begin with, a Shabad by Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji in Rag Jai Jaivanti. Ram Simar, eh tere kaaj hai. Ram Simar, Ram Simar, Ram Simar, Ram Simar, eh तेरे काज है, तेरे काज है, तेरे काज है, राम सिमर, राम सिमर, राम सिमर, राम सिमर, माया को संग त्याग, माया को संग त्याग, प्रभु की शरण लाग, जगत सुख मान में थ्या झूठो सब साज है, राम सिमर राम सिमर राम सिमर राम सिमर सोपने जो धन पहचान काहे पर करत मान बारू की भीत जैसे वसुधा को राज है नानक जन कहत बात नानक जन कहत बात बिनस जय तेरो गात छिन छिन कर गयो काल तैसे जात आज है राम सिमर राम सिमर है तेरे काज है तेरे काज है तेरे काज है राम सिमर राम सिमर राम सिमर राम सिमर
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. Beautiful. So, for most of our listeners, I imagine this style of kirtan is not very familiar. Can you explain what Drupad is?
Yeah, it's good question. Drupad.
It was my first question, you know, what can I say?
Yeah, I should have seen that one coming. Drupad, there's various theories about the origins, but in medieval India, these genres developed often in parallel. They were used in Sufi contexts, in Vaishnav Bhakti context, Nirgun Bhakti, by the Sikh gurus, by the other Bhagats, and also in the courts, equally, the courts of the Mughals, the courts of the Hindu Rajputs, the royal courts. So the origins are, developing from the 13th, 14th century onward. And as a genre, musically, what distinguishes Drupad from other forms of what I would call rag sangeet or rag-based music is one, stylistically. We can say that my Guruji often says Drupad is a genre which is Naad Pradhan. So a genre in which the Naad, the sound current, is very given a certain sanctity. We need to give the vowels correct pronunciation to utilize the sound properly, and the elongation of vowels, and you'll heard the tempo of this composition was quite slow, drawn out. Some people often assume that Drupad is always slow. That's not necessarily the case, But what comes across is if I'm saying Ram, the ah vowel, the ra syllable, the nad within that syllable, is what is taken great care over, So pronunciation and limited use of ornamentation. It's quite majestic and pure approach to rag music, and wherever you go in South Asian rag-based music, people will often look to Drupad as exemplary example of how a rag should sound. Because it's seen as a kind of the pristine form of rag, where the naad is, the main element.
So, is it likely that this style of Kirtan would have been sung in the court of Guru Nanak?
It's possible. Myself, I've taken some time to study music from a literary perspective. So just looking at the text and seeing what we can say about the music purely from the time-tested, the evidence that we have, which has stood the test of time, is the written form. Oral traditions, things can seep in, things can seep out, things can be lost. But if we just take the written, which is kind of, we're assuming that, that's remained pretty much a constant from the time of the Gurus, then the evidence that I found suggests that Drupad as a style came more in the time of Guru Ram Das and Guru Arjan Dev Ji.
Interesting.
So I can give you a few examples. So one
Sure.
characteristic of another defining feature of Drupad compositions is they usually have 4 parts.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the kind of Sthai, Antara, and Sanchari and Abhog is technical terminology. But the 4 lines, that will correspond to 4 separate singing sections, separate melodies. And if you look at the Bani of each line, typically Drupad will always end in the same rhyming pattern. So it will not be a rhyming couplet ending AA, then BB, then CC, at the ending. It will always be A. So if you listen to the Shabad that I sang, Ram Simar, eh hai tere kaaj hai. The ending is kaaj hai. Then, Maya ko sang tyag prabhu ju ki sharan lag jagat sukh maan mithya jhootho sab saaj hai. So kaaj hai, then saaj hai. Then, supne jo dhan pachan kahe par karat maan baru ki bheet jaise basuda ko raj hai. So kaaj hai, saaj hai, raj hai, aaj hai. These are the endings of the 4 lines within the composition.
So
this is
it seems
Guru Tegh
then
Bahadur.
so it seems then that what you're saying is that Drupad is more likely to be used with certain Bani, but not necessarily any Bani.
Correct. That's my understanding from what I've explored both from a musical perspective and from the written perspective. There's many examples of Guru Arjan's compositions which are, you can say this is Guru Arjan Dev Ji's Drupad, for example. This is definitely sung as a Drupad.
Okay. So the fact that you're mentioning Guru Arjan is very key to my few questions around this that I want to bring up. So the history seems to indicate that it was Guru Arjan who initiated the ragi denotation for a musician different than the Rababis, who had been the traditional musicians in the Guru's courts from the time of Madonna with Guru Nanak through those four Gurus before Guru Arjan, with the emphasis, I would say, on these two musicians, Balwand and Sata.
Yep.
And then, of course, there is this story around the musicians leaving the court of Guru Arjan when he first became Guru and going with his elder brother, and then coming back. And as they came back, they offered this Balwand Divar, this composition that they had created, and within which is the Shabad Dandan Ramdas Guru.
Yes.
And it was during this time that Guru Arjan, because the Rababis were not available, that he created this concept of musicians who were not Rababis, but were Sikhs, were not Muslims, because Rababis were generally Muslim. So is there a connection between the Rababi tradition and Drupad, or are they independent?
So I've heard an account from one of the old generation of ragis who's passed away now, Gyani Dayal Singh. He said in a video that it's a small video clip, is actually available on YouTube. He says actually Bhai Satya and Balwand were very proficient in the Drupad style. So by Madonna, this is according to his, whatever he heard, because he was actually an archivist, and he archived and notated compositions from Bhai Taba, one of the old Rababis prior to partition, who came in the 1950s, from Lahore to Delhi for 2 trips. He came 3 months at a time to archive these compositions, have his oral tradition of repertoire be notated by Gyani Dayal Singh, which then was later published in a book of this old repertoire. And so Gyani Dayal Singh had this direct interaction with the Rababis, and this is, the descendants of the Rababis of the Gurus, so there's a continuity there. And he said that Bhai Satya Balwand were very proficient in Drupad. They had memorized 1,000 Drupad compositions, and he says that Bhai Madonna and various people claim actually that Bhai Madonna had sons, but his sons then didn't have any further issues, so his lineage was, his blood lineage was ended there. But anyway, his descendants, his sons, perhaps if they were performing within the court of Guru Angad and Guru Amar Das, musically the Sangat was growing, and musically it said that the Gurus were wanting better musicians. So this is one interpretation. And so Satya Balwand were invited, and they were very proficient in the style. And it's from the time of Guru Ram Das that you see the Partal form, which is very closely linked to Drupad as a genre. Partal comes into Gurbani from the time of Guru Ram Das, and Guru Arjan is the first one to compose Drupad in this 4-part structure, which very much is identical to the Drupad structure of compositions sung in the court of Emperor Akbar at the same time. Akbar and Guru Arjan were the same time period. So the compositions of Tansen, the very famous Indian classical musician of Akbar's court, those compositions match exactly the same format as what Guru Arjan Dev Ji was using in his court. So it may be that through these Rababi musicians, who, these hereditary musicians were also employed often in royal courts, and they would travel, and so there's this idea that perhaps Drupad became more established within the Sikh tradition because of Satya Balwand coming in.
Interesting. So the non-Sikh influence, the Islamic Rababis, was it such that before partition that there would be an intermingling with Sikhs study with these Rababis, or was that not happening?
We don't have any historical record of that happening during the Guru's period, as far as I'm aware. We have lots of examples of that happening in the around the turn of the 20th century, when things was changing. This is the colonial period now. The British had annexed Punjab, and things were changing very quickly, and Ragis were increasingly studying from the Rababis at that time. It may be that because history, we have so much references because of the colonial period. There's lots of written documents. We have lots of examples of Ragis learning from Rababis then. But we don't know historically whether the Rababis taught openly. For example, often if you look at similar hereditary musician communities in the Hindustani rag music world, they will not teach outside the family, because music was their livelihood. It was kind of a very closely guarded possession. Intangible, but it was that was what defined them. That was what was their existence was based around music. So for them to teach outsiders, often it was not considered so. It's known that they generally didn't like to do that.
Just as a kind of technical question, and because you are a student of Drupad, can you explain what the Riaz approach is? Riaz being the vocal practice that a student might need to do every day. Is it different from what you might see in a classical Hindustani vocal practice?
So Riaz, just literally means your practice, and often it's linked to this idea if we look in the Sanskrit terminology, the idea of sadhana, which obviously comes in any tradition, yogic traditions. Sadhana is very prominent, where a practice becomes it becomes spiritual. And Riaz also has this same connotation. There's a degree of devotion that emerges through your commitment to a practice over time. And what that practice constitutes is often quite a diverse and elaborate set of, varied exercises for a vocalist. Riaz can also be, done on an instrument, which will then, be techniques relating to the instrument. But in terms of vocal music, Riaz typically, as a Kirtani, what I would say, where one's main thing is Kirtan, you would, as well as doing all the exercises that a Hindustani classical musician would have to do to develop the voice and to sing in tune and to develop your pronunciation, you'd have to memorize Gurbani also. So as a Kirtani, there's a different level of Riaz which also happens. But otherwise, there's no difference. Rag is rag, and to develop a voice which is capable of reproducing rag and doing justice to the rag, we have a whole host of exercises using the Indian solfa syllables, sa re ga ma pa da ni sa, very infinite number of combinations of those syllables. But then akar is also very important. Developing a good breath control just using the syllable ah. And some people do also exercises with e, u, or all the different vowels. It's about having a control over the nad, control of your breath. And that it takes obviously a high level of dedication and time commitment. There's many stories of great musicians who have claimed to have practiced 12 hours a day. And people often ask, when do you eat, when do you sleep, and things like this. But it's considered something very sacred to any Hindustani classical musician. Never mind a ragi or rababi or a kirtani or a yeah.
So some of you will want to look this up on YouTube. Kirit Singh has several wonderful videos of performing Drupad, and but he also has under the channel, the Madonna project. He has a whole series of travel videos or vlogs, and they're amazing to watch. Especially if you've been to India, you'll see familiar things that will remind you of your visit. But then also his trip ventures into Pakistan, which most of us have never been to. And it was very touching to go through all of those myself as I was getting ready to have this program with you. And in one of them, you interview Ustad Murli Manohar.
Yes. Murli Manohar, yes.
Yes, and he is well known to us here in Espanola, in New Mexico, because he's been out here several times, accompanying Ustad Narinder Singh, coming to play, and of course they both have had an impact on our students at the Miripiri Academy in Amritsar. What is his connection to Drupad and or Rababi tradition?
So his father was a very well-known tabla player in Amritsar in the mid 20th century, Ustad Bhajan Lal. And him, even when he was young, and his older brother is also a very good tabla player, Ustad Hari Om, who lives in Jalandhar. So both Murli Manohar, Hari Om, and their father, obviously the father spent much more time, learnt from Ustad Ratan Singh, or Bhai Ratan Singh, who was a very well-known percussionist. Again, he was associated with Taran Taran, which is just very close to Amritsar. Mm-hmm. And he was a direct disciple of Bhai Rakha. And Bhai Rakha was one of the very well-known Rababi percussionists who used to perform in the Darbar Sahib. So in the Golden Temple, this would have been in the early 20th century and perhaps late 19th century. So that lineage from Bhai Rakha to Bhai Ratan Singh to then this family of Bhajan Lal and Murli Manohar and Hari Om Ji, they are in a way custodians of that percussive tradition of the Rababis of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. And obviously Ustad Murli Ji still lives in Amritsar. His house is there. He still there, and I mean you'll be familiar with him. But the tradition which he bears as a custodian, the link to Drupad is really only through the fact that in Punjab you had actually, today, if I may digress a little bit, the tabla, which everyone's very familiar with as a typical Indian percussion instrument, and it's become the ubiquitous accompaniment for Kirtan across. You go into any Gurdwara, you'll find a tabla. But the form in which we find the tabla today is actually the tabla which was used outside of Punjab, the tabla which belongs to Delhi and Farrukhabad and Ajrara, other centers of North Indian music. So the Punjabi form of the tabla was actually also known as Jodi, or tabla. And the left-hand bass drum, which is now made from copper and is kind of this bowl rounded shape, used to be a cylindrical wooden drum. The right-hand side is still wooden, so that was the same. Mm-hmm. But the left-hand side was wooden and it was cylindrical, And instead of this black kind of mixture made from iron filings and rice powder, and which is then dried and put onto the skin, it used to be applied with freshly made dough. So even in the Darbar Sahib, they would bring from the langar, a portion of freshly made atta, what they call atta, the dough, for making the chapatis, but they would bring it into the Darbar Sahib for the percussionists to apply freshly when they're about to begin a chonki, a Kirtan sitting. So this old form of the Punjabi tabla, which is also known as jodi, was capable of accompanying all of the styles of rag music. So Drupad being one. I didn't mention earlier when we were discussing what defines Drupad. Another feature of Drupad is that it's accompanied by the pakawaj, which is this open-sounded, resonant strokes on a drum. Can be cylindrical, like a barrel drum, which is played side to side, left and right. But in Punjab, the more popular form was, if you imagine that's a barrel drum cut in half and turned on its side, you have two wooden shells, and then the same repertoire, the same pakawaj, open resonant strokes. So a typical thing of pakawaj is that the whole hand is used to strike the drum, whereas in tabla you have this, finger strokes. So both the left and the right are open, very resonant and powerful, and because of the application of the dough, it's hard to. It's a shame that we can't give example, now. But through recordings online, you can hear the difference in the sound. The pakawaj is very resonant, very powerful, and you imagine in the pre-amplification era. So going back, 50, 60 years before there was amplification, this was an instrument which would have had the effect on the sangat that was gathered, So it was a very powerful and a very resonant instrument. So the jodi, or the Punjabi form of the tabla, was capable of producing this pakawaj, this open resonant strokes, but also you can change your technique and start playing with fingers, and you could accompany lighter, they're called lighter forms today, but there was never any distinction between classical and light music. Music was music. And these other forms, other genres within rag-based music, which kind of called for and demanded a different style of accompaniment, which was more subtle and more delicate, were accompanied with this closed style, which is known as gat. Saat is the open pakawaj tradition, which is used to accompany Drupad. So coming back to the why I went off on this tangent,
it's all good.
Murli ji is a custodian of this Punjabi jodi tradition, in which there is the open repertoire of the pakawaj, and there's the closed repertoire which is used for accompanying other styles of music. So that's the connection. He is, he would be versed in how and what to play if someone were to sing Drupad, because he's inherited that repertoire, whereas most ragis, just to be honest about the situation today, most ragis do not have the understanding. They've not inherited that repertoire to be able to accompany Drupad properly, So,
or studied. Perhaps inheriting
they've not trained.
The thing, So, in my ear, I can hear Qawwali sort of blending into the Rababi style. What is the connection between those two forms of music?
It's very interesting. I think it's important to understand in Punjab as a region. Punjab was one of the areas across North India where Sufism had a very strong hold. If you look at the Sufi tradition in North India, so many of the Sufi poet saints that contributed literature and what they call kalam in the Sufi tradition, the Bani, their equivalent of the Bani in Sufi tradition. So many of the poet saints came from Punjab. Baba Bulle Shah, Baba Shah Hussain, there's Baba Sheikh Farid, whose Bani is also in Guru
Yeah.
Granth Sahib. So I think it's important to recognize that the idea of Sufism as something separate from Sikh tradition is also a little bit of a problematic, in the sense that there's overlap, and there's very clear overlap in the inclusion of Baba Sheikh Farid's, who was a direct, he was the holder of the tradition, he was the custodian of the Chishti, which is one of the older Sufi traditions within South Asia. He was the inheritor of that tradition. He was what they call the Gaddi Nashin. He sat on the kind of symbolic throne, if you like, of that tradition in the 13th century. So Sufism was very clearly very strong in Punjab through these various saint traditions. And if you go, obviously, because of partition, and we can come to partition later, but little survives of that Sufi tradition in eastern Punjab today. If you go to western Punjab, Pakistan, you have shrines, Sufi shrines, left, right, and center.
Well,
So-
I think we're going to come to partition right now, actually.
Okay.
Because I do want to just touch on this theme a little bit. You're familiar with the work of Amaradeep Singh, who traveled to Pakistan and researched some of the abandoned gurdwaras and the people who had taken care of them for a while and done what they could, perhaps, and talked when I saw a program that he was interviewed on. He talks a lot about and this concept of Nanak Pantis, people who were followers of the teachings of Guru Nanak, but perhaps never embraced the Khalsa form. And this spills into this discussion around the Rababis, because the Rababis, of course, Muslims, and they were not only the first musicians in the courts of our gurus, but they actually continued to be welcome into the gurdwaras right up until partition, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's easy to understand that the traumatizing effect of partition may have made a lot of people unwilling to perhaps embrace their Muslim brothers those in the Sikh tradition. But is there some other way of understanding the abandonment of the Rababi's inclusion into the Gurdwara programs? Do you see it in any other way?
Yeah, this is actually a significant part of my research, my thesis, my PhD thesis will, it's currently the chapter that I'm working on, so it's kind of all fresh in my head. It's quite complex, but a number of issues. So one is the idea of the religious reform which was taking place in colonial Punjab. And this was manifested in the Singh Sabha reform movement. So the Singh Sabha, today they manage through the Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, this SGPC, they manage the Golden Temple, all the historic shrines, Bangla Sahib in Delhi, Sisganj Sahib. Most of the Gurdwaras across Punjab, I would say, are managed by the Singh Sabha and the SGPC. So they were founded in 1870s, and their initial purpose was slightly different, but what was happening is that in parallel you had Hindu reform movements being founded, such as the Arya Samaj. You had Muslim reform movements being founded, such as the Ahmadiyya movement. And these movements were inspired by colonial ideas often. So ideas of social reform, which the colonial administration were pushing for, female increase in, education for women, modern values which we kind of are very proud of today and cling quite proudly to. These were all new, and they were introduced through this colonial period. So the religious reform movements became a medium through which social reform could also manifest. And often the religious reform movements, such as the Singh Sabha, became the most active and the most active agents of social reform in India, pushing for the democratization of education, making education accessible to all, making education accessible for women, and various other types of social reform. But along with this, the formation of these movements, you had a kind of distinction. The Singh Sabha was now associated with the Sikh community. You had one for the Hindu community, one for the Muslim community. And you had, in parallel, the influence of Christian missionaries. So they had set up missionary centers all across Punjab and were accepting converts. Hindus started to do the same and were trying to push against the colonial, this conversions of indigenous population to Christianity. So they started to try and fight and defend and bring people back into Hinduism. Then the Sikhs felt the need to do the same, and it was kind of this, it became a very competitive scenario, and the Hindus and the Sikhs started fighting between themselves and between the Muslims, and this situation kind of rapidly evolved into a very communal, where you had to belong to one. Identity politics became very paramount in Punjab, and you had to choose which group you belong to. You know, you have stories of someone like Partition Singh, who was a key writer and agent of the Singh Sabha reform movement. He actually belonged to the Arya Samaj before. So he clearly identified with this Hindu aspect at some point in his life, but then decided to change. And you had to end up choosing your camp, so to speak. And this communalism grew, and it became... is a very good book by Harjot Oberoi, who discusses the construction of religious boundaries during this period, how they never existed as firm boundaries in the past, but through the colonial reform process, these communities... As you say,
As you say, this is a complex thing to try to unravel.
Yeah, I mean, this is why a thesis is even not enough to do justice to, but to try and just make it concise that after that process of religion becoming key, to your identity, communities like the Rababis, who were, without doubt, and this is something which was difficult for people to understand today, they were without doubt Sikh and Muslim at the same time. And this is very difficult for people to understand. And same goes for the Nanakpanthis. Many Nanakpanthis were fakirs of a Sufi Muslim tradition, or Udasi fakirs of a Hindu tradition. So, but they were also Sikh. And this is what we struggle, with our modern kind of programming to grasp. But there's, many accounts and stories which, I can, get into a few to give examples if you feel relevant, but illustrating
I think
the
we're
devotion.
Running out of time. I think we're running out of time, so unfortunately we'll have to perhaps save that for another interview. But clearly, the impact of partition and then the struggles around what you were just describing, they had a profound impact on this musical community that was really focused around the court of the Guru. But then as partition happened, then everything got sort of tossed to the wind in some respects.
I'll just give you an example, just to very briefly. It's like someone asking me, are you white or are you a Sikh?
Yeah.
It's like I have to suddenly choose one of my identities. Am I a Muslim or am I Sikh? That's what essentially happened to the Rababis.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's wonderful to see your interviews with those people. there were two women that you interviewed. I think they were sisters, and
Yeah.
they were descendants of the Rababis, and they sang beautifully. Um, was that part of the Rababi tradition to have women
So,
singing?
they weren't blood descendants; they were disciples of. They'd learned
Ah, I
from
see.
Rababi.
Okay.
So, actually, Rababi women would never perform in public. That was one of the things. If you go back to that uh, pre-partition Punjab, women performing in public were associated with entertainment, and it was kind of morally became very questionable. So Rababis had always been very firm about, no, our women don't perform. We perform devotional music. The men perform. So
Yeah,
they were. I've spoken to Rababi women. They were very good singers, but they would only sing in the house.
interesting. Um, so tell us a little bit more about where you are with the Madonna project.
So we're, in parallel to all this research, which is linked to my PhD, which is ongoing. We're making a short film. So what you saw in the video vlogs, which people can see on the Madonna Project YouTube channel, is just a very light-hearted, kind of fun way of showing people the journey that we went on, and what's, a glimpse of what is to come. But we're working on producing a short film, so that's kind of in the pipeline. Hopefully by maybe end of 2021, that would be coming towards fruition. And then an online resource, a website. I'll be working on a website and an archive of all of the interviews. There's so much fascinating history, which I feel can waken a spirit of Guru Nanak's Sikhi, today,
Mm.
which sometimes we get lost. We can't see the wood for the trees, so to speak. We get lost in the detail. But Guru Nanak Sikhi was very so much more vast than what we kind of boxed it into today. So I feel like this, through the film, raising awareness of this Rababi tradition, and having this online resource where some of the research will be showed, the interviews will be showed, and people can learn about this and hopefully be inspired by that tradition, which sadly, has been tragically, affected through forces of colonialism, modernization, globalization, commercialization, and so on.
I think if you were to make a film about the number of restaurants that you visited, it would be even longer than the documentary.
Yeah. Now, thankfully, the food in Pakistan was not so good, so we couldn't include too much in the vlog.
Yeah, yeah. So, I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to all your research and everything that you've unearthed about this area of Gurbani, an area that many of us didn't know about or didn't understand much. And so I'm really looking forward to you continuing and completing that project and working on others. I hope you must have hundreds of hours of video that you recorded, and I'm sure it's not that much of it's going to end up in the documentary, but I hope it goes somewhere that we can access it, because
definitely.
I think you documented some people who we may not have any other way of connecting with in 10 years or 20 years, and so it's very valuable, and I'm so delighted.
People just have to be
see.
patient. It's all in the pipeline.
That's great.
Yeah.
Would you kindly share a little music as we bring this program to a close? That would be so
Yes,
nice.
certainly. Yes.
While you're getting ready, I want to thank Kirit Singh. Again, wonderful information that he's shared with us today, and his singing, of course, at the beginning, and now we're very grateful for. So next week, those of you who would like to tune in for our program again, we will have the guest is Guru Ganesha Singh from the Guru Ganesha Band, American musician, and then after that, the week after that, we'll have Sangeet Kaur, who is also American and many of you have heard her recording of Dandan Ramdas Guru. So, and Kirit?
Yeah. I'd just like to say again, thank you, Drupad Singh ji, for this session. It's been a great opportunity to share. And I'm going to close with a Shabad by Guru Tegh Bahadur again. So the Shabad is, I thought it's appropriate given this situation with the coronavirus and being locked down in isolation, many people. So the Shabad is Kahe re ban khoj na jai, sarb nivasi sada alepa tohi sanga samai, which translates more or less to, why do you go searching in the forest? The one is with you, essentially. So this time where we're alone is an opportunity really to go inwards. And Guru Tegh Bahadur says, "Ghat hi khojo bhai." He's saying, "Oh brother, search within your heart, and you'll find the one."
काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, सर्ब निवासी सदाले पा तो ही संग संग समाई, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, पोह मध जो बास बसत है, पोह मध जो बास बसत है, मोकर माहे जैसे छाई, तैसे ही हर बसे निरंतर, घट ही खोजो खोजो भाई, बाहर भीतर एको जानो, बाहर भीतर एको जानो, ए गुर ज्ञान बताई, जन नानक बिन आपाची ने, जन नानक बिन आपाची ने, मेटे न भ्रम की काई, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, सर्ब निवासी सदाले पार तो ही संग संग समाई, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए, काहे रे बन खोजन जाए।
Thank you so much, Kirit Singh. We so appreciate your dedication and your study. So keep it up. We all are counting on you to do the work. So
Yes.
we can
With
learn
all your
something.
blessings.
All
Thank you
right,
so much.
great. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Satnam Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Sa
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.